Hi and welcome to Matrix Moments. This is Saloni and I'm here with Vikram Vaidyanathan, Managing Director, Matrix Partners India. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about extreme hiring and why it's the most underestimated role of a founder. At Matrix, we spend a significant amount of our time with founders, helping them hire and pick the right people for their team. Vikram, can you tell us a little bit about this?
Saloni, good to be here. And this is a topic that's really close to my heart. I personally spend a lot of time on it. It's a running joke in the family. My wife thinks that I'll make a better recruiter than a VC. And if this VC gig doesn't work out, that's the role for me.
That's the idea.
Yeah. And so this podcast is really learnings from working closely with our founders, speaking with founders in the ecosystem on what's worked for them. And we're trying to put all of this together. I want to set it up by talking about how I think about building like a hot institutional startup. I always compare it to sending a rocket ship to the moon. A lot of things have to come together in exactly the right time, at exactly the right proportion, for even that rocket ship to take off.
Right.
And very few of these rocket ships actually take off. And even once it's taken off, you need boosters at every stage to make sure that it gets from one orbit to the next. And often some things will get stuck in orbit, and often we hear stories of things failing in spectacular fashion where the rocket ship has crashed back to the earth. And as a founder, the most important thing you can do is to find boosters at every stage, which takes your rocket ship to the next level.
Sure.
And people is really the most critical booster at any stage, whether you're at an early stage or whether you're a unicorn trying to get to the next level. The people decisions are going to define how fast your company is moving. So the biggest learning for me is that hiring momentum often is equal to company momentum. How do you get this hiring momentum going in your organization? To begin with, founders like to get every single hire right, and they think that the first 10 hires are make or break. If you get even if you get the first one of those 10 hires wrong, it's like you got everything wrong. I disagree. It's not about getting the first 10 hires right, but using the first 10, 15 hires to building your hiring muscle and getting your hiring muscle right. And that's extreme hiring. What's the process? What's the philosophy that you're following to get your hires right over a long period of time? And that's what we're trying to distill in this podcast, which is how do you build your extreme hiring muscle?
Right. So, very often when hiring, founders are faced with the dilemma or the trade off that's required to be made between one, a candidate who is hardworking, a hustler, ready to work the long hours, probably take a pay cut, work on ESOPs equity, full of passion, you find the connect chemistry with them, all of that. And then on the other hand, you have a candidate who's got 7 to 10 years worth of work experience in the industry, super deep product knowledge, a great network within the space, etc. He's got the whole package. But how do you really make the trade-off between the two? Which one should you pick and why?
Yeah, this is a conversation that happens every day with founders, which is I really like this guy, but he doesn't have the experience. Or this person has all the experience, but I really don't like him. And it's a hard call. But if I had to give an overall underlying principle, I would say overweight DNA versus skill set, especially in the initial days. And my partner Avnish calls it intrinsics and intrinsics based hiring and intrinsics based evaluation. And we're definitely overweight that. So I would say that rule is probably very easy to apply when it's three things are true. First, it's very early in the journey. It's a new space with high uncertainty, so you really don't know what anyone's role is really going to be. A product role might be a business role might be a operations role, and people have to really go with the flow. And the third, most importantly, if it's a co-founder CXO level position, just overweight DNA. That's the only way that partnership will last. The biggest tip I have there is to actually define that DNA and make it part of the vocabulary of the organization and make it part of the vocabulary of hiring. So this is how we've implemented it internally. We have we have different intrinsics that we look for, but one of them is hunger and hustle, and we've made
Right.
H&H, which is our own abbreviation.
Of course.
And hunger is, deep ambition to get to achieve something, and hustle is an ability to get things done. And we'll be having discussions or debriefing after an interview, and we'll say low on H&H or very high on H&H, and we will immediately know what the other person is saying. And that becomes an easier discussion to have between co-founders, between top management, rather than saying, oh, this guy is like me, I like this guy. Whereas if you define the vocabulary and say, you know what, these 5 things on DNA are most important to us, it also makes it easier to have hiring discussions internally and debriefing on interview discussions internally. There are times when skill set, I wouldn't say trumps, but skill set overweights DNA.
Right.
It's when you have scaling challenges and people have solved those scaling challenges before. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. So you want somebody who's actually already invented the wheel. The second is it's a very defined problem statement and you want specific capability. So for example, handling concurrency issues in backend servers. It's very specific, and unless someone's done it before, you can't bet on somebody to come in and learn this. So in those times, I'm probably taking it to an extreme to make a point, but there are areas, whether it's finance, whether it is, it might be AI, it might be engineering management, where there are people who have, with experience, will actually do a better job in taking your company from maybe not the 0 to 1 journey, but maybe the 1 to 5 journey, and definitely in the 5 to 10 journey.
Right. Like the technical know-how part of the job.
Yes. I found founders who are on both sides of this debate. Some people will say, I want only DNA, and some people will say, I want only skill set. Beyond a point, you can't actually second guess your own thought process as a founder. I think it's important to realize that this is what you overweight and you over-index on, and understand what is the shortcomings of that particular strategy or not. I was having this conversation with a founder of a large unicorn, and he said, hey, I know this, that I'm overweight on DNA, and I'm okay with my company getting a team discount, which is a capability discount, but I'm not okay with my company getting a culture discount, because that's who I am. I don't want this to be a culture discount. And I think it picked it up from one of the YC talks and so on, and he really implemented it. I thought that that was a very self-aware statement to say, this is who I am, therefore I'm okay with this. That I'll be okay if people say, this team doesn't have the kind of capability, but this team has a fantastic culture, because that's who I am and that's what I want to build.
Right, fair enough. But coming back to intrinsics, which is what you just mentioned, how does one, so for example, when you look at a CV and you're meeting the person and you're evaluating their CV, and in that process, if you have to sort of break their CV down in terms of reading in between the lines and knowing whether that matches the DNA vocabulary that you're looking for and whether they'd be a good fit for your company or not, how do you really assess that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Everybody says that they want to do this DNA-based hiring, and then go back to doing skill set based hiring once they start looking at CVs. I think if you're doing DNA based hiring, if you decided that's what you want to do early, you have to adopt extreme referencing. Now, I'm going to point you to a podcast by my partner Tarun Dowda, who's the extreme referencing Nazi internally, and he has a 30-minute podcast on extreme referencing. But let me just set up how we think about it. Extreme referencing is making sure that you're talking to people who know this person really well. And from an intrinsics perspective, we believe that 80% of who that person is, you can actually find out by talking to people who know that person really well. And beyond a point, in the 1 hour, 2 hour discussion that you're going to have with that person, you're not going to discover what makes that person really, really tick. Now, the biggest mistake with referencing is that it comes too late in the process, and it's done as a check the box and almost after the decision is made, to make sure that, oh, I want to make sure this decision is not so wrong.
Right.
After you've made the decision. For us, extreme referencing is it comes very early, ideally even before you meet that person, or after the first conversation that you've had, to make a hypothesis about that person, or to actually verify certain things that you found in the first conversation. So very early in the process, ideally before you meet or after the first discussion. The second thing is it's 360 degree. You don't just talk to the bosses. You talk to peers. You talk to people who've reported to them. You talk to friends who know them socially. And if you can get away with it, have a coffee along with the spouse. So then you'll really know what makes that person tick. So it would needs to be truly 360 degree if you really want to hone in on the intrinsics. And the final tip on extreme referencing is ask the soft questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions which are if you were their mentor, what would you tell them? If uh, what would hold them back in this particular role, and if they were not to succeed, what would you think will not make them succeed? And uh, then you can hopefully get to what makes them tick. Again, tips and tricks in Tarun Davda's podcast.
Okay, got it. But this sounds slightly complicated. How would you recommend a founder goes about doing this? Like, should they hire a recruitment agency or a consultant or just do it themselves?
Yeah, so it's really important to build this muscle early, both for the founder as well as the organization. And I often talk to founders and they say, what's your number one problem? They'll say, people, hiring. I don't have enough of them.
Yeah.
And then I say, how much time are you spending on hiring? They'll say, oh, I don't have the time to spend on hiring. Oh, I'm spending like 5%. Now, it can't be your number one problem and you're spending less than 5% of your time on it.
Right.
So the first thing is to manage your own calendar as a founder. So this is like a diet plan. If you and so it's going to sound like that, but if you follow it, you will become thin. And it sounds simple enough, but very few people do it. So this is sort of a recommendation, and one is every day of the week set aside 2 hours for hiring. 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening. In the hour in the morning, figure out who you want to ping, figure out you're talking to your recruiter, talking to your consultant to make sure that they're prioritizing the right things through the day. And 1 hour in the evening, maybe half an hour slots or 45 minute slots, talk to two people.
Right.
And make sure that these are calendared slots, nobody else can take them, and you're just in the habit of doing these discussions every day. And screen through the week. Ideally do it on video, and I seldom recommend doing things over a call, but doing it on video would be ideal. And just do 30-minute, 45-minute videos. Screen through the week, and then on Saturday or Sunday, whichever is your favorite day to work, figure out a 6 hour slot where you can meet people and make decisions, and get into the habit of making decisions every week, where don't postpone these decisions and say, I want to make these decisions at the end of every month. Every week that there is momentum of offers that you're getting out. I think if the founder is doing this, the rest of the organization is building a muscle, which is getting people in the door, getting interviews scheduled, making sure whoever is needed to make that decision gets in the room. All of this is automatically happening. So the founder's calendar and time management is probably key and number one. The second is every employee is a sourcer. Make every employee say, get me two people. And if you've over-indexed on getting 10 people, and each of those 10 people gets you two people, you're at 30 pretty quickly. And you hit your goal. And if you can figure out how every employee is in charge of hiring, I think you've really maximized the initial talent that you've got in. The third question I often get asked is, when should I hire a recruiter? Should I do an RPO? Should I do a consultant? The net of it is that you should do a combination of all. But if you have to do only one, get a recruiter. Okay. If you have to hire more than 15 to 20 people in a year, you need one person whose life depends on this. This is your most important problem, and somebody's life every day should depend on getting people hired. And we'll get into what makes a good recruiter. Maybe that's a topic on another podcast. But having someone who even skims through all the CVs, says this looks like a fit, figures out how to make sure that scheduling is happening, figures out how other people are interviewing at the right time so that it can make a decision. That's a full-time role. The second is RPOs, or call it recruitment process outsourcing, which is RPO, which is consultants who are working internally full time or half time with you. Again, these are guys who can get a lot of the process part of recruiting, which is making sure your applications are getting tracked, all the CVs are together, all the notes are together, making sure things are getting scheduled. That's a big part of the friction in getting your recruitment muscle going. So RPOs are a big help. Consultants, whether you love them or hate them, you'll need them. Build a network of them. You will know what CVs are in the market. Right. And as an early founder, if you don't know what CVs are in the market, you won't have your top of the funnel. It's the same as consumers and customers. So you need the top of the funnel, and you need those CVs. So build that network, and especially before you build a employee and hiring brand, consultants are an extension of that.
Got it. Vikram, is there one sort of example or anecdote that you can share with us where you've hired someone, it's gone terribly wrong, and your biggest learning from that?
This week or this month or
whatever you can decide, you can pick that.
Yeah.
Whichever is the worst hire of all.
And seriously, by definition, hiring is not an exact science. You're looking for a missing puzzle piece, and you don't even know what that looks like. And you also need to make sure that the puzzle then fits for the puzzle piece. So in all of this, if you're getting 50% of your hiring decisions right, I think a founder's on a fantastic track. Okay, I don't want to go into a specific situation, but I'll give you a few learnings from 2 or 3 situations in the recent past. The first learning is, when you get someone who you think is not a DNA or culture fit with your organization, the organization actually rejects them. And you don't diagnose it early enough, and you find them being a misfit in rooms, misfit in discussions, and then you have not set that person up for success or set up the org to accept that person. That's probably the first place where things go wrong, and I think founders can intervene. If they diagnose it early and they say that I'm going to make sure that this person is successful, I think you can make a hire like that work. The second is, you're not committing to the success of that person, and avoid having real conversations when you see something like that happen. And a real conversation is to sit down with that person saying, I believe in you, but I see all of these different issues and I really want to make this work, and having that conversation consistently over the first 2-3 weeks. Because once this conversation gets away from you, where the organization has decided to reject that person, it's a downward spiral for that person. And the third, when you've done all of this and the person fits, and then suddenly that person leaves, usually that's because founders have not had the journey conversation. And the journey conversation is about money. How much money do you want to make? About designation. What do you want your long-term designation should be? And the third is about learning. And again, it's important to have some of these real conversations along the way, and make sure that you can deliver on that person's overall aspirations. Not according to exactly their timeline, but at least you've understood their aspirations and you're committed to delivering them.
Okay. And my last question, which is sort of like a follow-up to the previous question, which is, what happens when you hire and then you've realized that you've obviously made a blunder, you've picked the wrong person, or you've made a mistake? Should you then pull the plug or reinvest in that person through deep training?
It's a very hard question, and there is so much context to this question, because if your startup is in a 3-month runway situation versus a 12-month runway situation versus you're trying to build a specific function, so there's a lot of context. So I don't, without going into all of that context and context specificity, let me try and generalize and answer on this. Sure. I think it's important to remember, while hiring and investing in people, you're dealing with people's lives and careers, and people spend 80-90% of their time in your organization. And founders who understand that and connect with their team at a real level usually build loyal organizations that go the extra mile for them. You could have made a mistake as a founder in, let's say, three ways. The first is you hired someone with wrong intent, right? They don't work hard, or they're always talking about other people behind their back. There are some things that are just no-nos. They will be a source of enormous negative energy and drain the energy of the organization. With them, I think you have to just act swiftly, cleanly, and make sure that you have an amicable separation, but a separation. The second is you've gotten the intrinsics right, and you've got the DNA right, but that person is struggling in terms of the enormity of the problem that's in front of them. For them, I would always give long rope and make sure that you're surrounding them with capability. The third is that you've got the capability right, but the chemistry is off. That's when it becomes very nuanced, where if you can, I would urge founders to overinvest at that point in time. And it's easier said than done. And whenever I have this conversation, founders will say it's easy for you to say you don't have to deal with that person every day. and I say that's true, which is why I can also give you this advice outside, in that you actually have to invest in building some of this chemistry, because this is a person who's delivered in their lives previously and they're not delivering here. Can you create an environment where they can deliver? And that it's up to you to create that environment where they can deliver.
Right. Thanks, Vikram. Okay, so to recap all of what we've just discussed, at the early stages, hiring momentum equals company momentum. When starting up, founders often chase hiring the perfect team, that is to get the first 10 hires right, which in an ideal world is great, but on a realistic level, hiring the 10 best people you can find is also good to start with. Always overweight DNA over skill set. Intrinsic based hiring has proven to be more effective, especially when it comes to roles that don't necessarily require a technical background. When hiring for DNA, it helps to define what the DNA stands for. For example, at Matrix, we look for people who are high in hunger and hustle. Similarly, listing out a vocabulary of characteristics or intrinsics you're looking for in candidates eases the conversation and the discussion with the team when decision making. If you're doing this for the first time and you're not sure how to go about it, working with a recruiter is a good way to put a system in place and to follow a regime for this. And lastly, an early diagnosis of whether the person is a cultural fit or not is crucial to determine their longevity and success in your organization. Over-investing in terms of having multiple conversations and spending time with them to get to the bottom of the issue is well worth it if you feel the capability and the potential is in place. Thank you for listening, and you can find the transcribed version of this podcast on matrixpartners.in. You can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for more updates.